Have you ever had a boss who made your life a living hell? Someone who stole your credit, mocked you in meetings, and treated you like furniture? Well, pull up a stool, because I'm going to tell you the story of Arthur. He was a quiet 58-year-old accountant who was pushed too far. He didn't get mad. He didn't quit. He simply used a spreadsheet, a sticky note, and a timer to burn his boss's entire career to the ground without ever saying a word. This is the story of the silent revenge. Welcome back to the bar, everyone. Pull up a stool. You know, people think revenge is loud. They think it's screaming matches, throwing drinks, or slashing tires. But if there's one thing I've learned serving drinks for 20 years, it's that the scariest kind of revenge is silent. It's calculated. And usually, it's served by the person you least expect. Last night, a gentleman named Arthur walked in. Now, Arthur is 58 years old, from London, England. He's the kind of guy who wears a three-piece suit on a Tuesday and orders a gin and tonic, easy on the ice. He's been a senior auditor for a massive logistics firm for 3 decades. Arthur is the guy who knows where every single penny goes. He's quiet, diligent, and invisible. Or at least, he was invisible to his boss, a man we'll call Mr. Sterling. Sterling was the classic corporate nightmare. You know the type. Loud, brash, stole credit for everyone's work, and drove a car that cost more than Arthur's house. For years, Sterling treated Arthur like furniture. He'd snap his fingers to get Arthur's attention, call him Artie, knowing he hated it, and dismiss his concerns. But Arthur took it. He had a pension to worry about, and he was a professional. He kept his head down and his spreadsheets clean. But then, the incident happened. It was the annual shareholder meeting. Sterling stood up to present the quarterly earnings, numbers that Arthur had spent weeks perfecting, and he made a mistake. A big one. Instead of owning it, Sterling stopped the presentation, pointed a finger right at Arthur in the back of the room, and laughed. Well, if Artie here knew how to use a calculator, we wouldn't be in this mess, would we? The whole room laughed. Arthur didn't. Arthur didn't say a word. He just nodded, polished his glasses, and sat back down. Sterling thought he had crushed him. He thought Arthur was just a weak old man. But what Sterling didn't realize was that he had just humiliated the one man who knew the company's passwords better than the IT department. That night, Arthur didn't go home to sleep. He went back to the office, unlocked the archives, and started looking for a specific folder he had ignored for 5 years. So, it's 2 a.m., the office is dead silent except for the hum of the server room and the clicking of Arthur's mouse. He finds the folder. Now, most people looking for dirt expect a smoking gun, a massive wire transfer to the Cayman Islands, or a briefcase full of cash. But Arthur knew Sterling better than that. Sterling was greedy, but he wasn't stupid enough to make one big mistake. He was making thousands of tiny ones. Arthur started combing through the client entertainment budget from 3 years ago. He cross-referenced Sterling's calendar with the receipts. He found a dinner for 4 at a Michelin star restaurant in Paris listed as a strategic merger meeting. But when Arthur checked the flight logs, the only other person in Paris with Sterling that weekend wasn't a business partner, it was his mistress. And the merger? It was a weekend getaway charged entirely to the company. But that was just the appetizer. As Arthur dug deeper, he found a pattern. Every month, a recurring payment of exactly £4,500 went to a vendor called Apex Solutions. It was listed under IT maintenance. Arthur, being the man who paid the bills, knew for a fact that their IT was handled by a completely different firm. He looked up the registration for Apex Solutions. It was a shell company registered to a P.O. box in a town where Sterling's brother lived. Arthur sat back in his chair. He had enough right there to get Sterling fired. But remember, Sterling had humiliated him in front of the entire board. Getting him fired wasn't enough. Arthur didn't want Sterling to just leave. He wanted him to unravel. He wanted Sterling to feel the walls closing in, exactly like Arthur had felt in that meeting. So Arthur didn't call the police. He didn't call HR. Instead, he opened the payroll system and made one tiny, almost invisible change. So Arthur didn't steal any money. He didn't delete files. Instead, he used his administrator access to create a localized visual glitch that would only appear on one specific computer monitor in the entire building, Mr. Sterling's. The next morning, Sterling strutted into his office, coffee in hand, ready to ruin someone's day. He logged in to approve his weekly expenses, but when he scrolled down to the hidden payment for Apex Solutions, his shell company, the text wasn't black like usual. It was bright red. And right next to it in bold letters was a new status tag Arthur had coded the night before. Flagged for external audit. Arthur told me he could hear the scream through the glass walls of Sterling's office. Sterling came storming out, sweating bullets. He marched right up to Arthur's desk, but he had a problem. He couldn't explicitly ask, "Why is my fake company being investigated?" because that would admit the company was fake. So he had to dance around it. He was red-faced, sputtering. "Arthur, the system! There's a glitch in the vendor list." Arthur adjusted his glasses, looked at Sterling with the calmest expression imaginable, and said, "Is there, sir? Let me check on my terminal." Arthur pulled up the real master list, which he hadn't actually changed, and turned the screen towards Sterling. "Everything looks normal here, Mr. Sterling. All vendors are green. Maybe you just need to reboot." Sterling looked at Arthur's screen, then back at his office, looking like he was about to have a stroke. He went back inside and rebooted. When the computer came back up, the flagged warning was gone. Arthur had set it to disappear after a single viewing. Sterling slumped in his chair, thinking he was losing his mind. But Arthur was just getting warmed up. He knew that paranoia is a slow poison, and he had just administered the first dose. 2 days passed. Sterling was a wreck. Every time his phone buzzed, he jumped. Every time someone walked past his glass office, he covered his paperwork. But Arthur? Arthur was cool as a cucumber. He just kept sipping his tea and typing away. He knew that the initial scare had faded slightly, so it was time to turn the heat up. It was Wednesday morning when Arthur pulled his next move. He accessed the company's internal calendar system. Now, Sterling lived by his Outlook calendar. If it wasn't on the screen, it didn't exist. Arthur created a calendar invite for that Friday at 4 p.m. The subject line was simple but terrifying. Urgent, irregularities in discretionary spending. Now here is the genius part. Arthur added the CEO of the entire logistics group as the organizer. Then he manipulated the code so the invite appeared as confirmed on Sterling's calendar. But, and this is key, he blocked the notification from actually going to the CEO. So the CEO had no idea this meeting existed. To the CEO, Friday afternoon was open for golf. To Sterling, Friday afternoon was his execution. I wish you could have seen Arthur's face when he told me this part. He said he watched Sterling check his phone during lunch. The color drained from the man's face so fast he looked like a sheet of paper. Sterling stood up, knocked his chair over, and didn't even pick it up. He ran, literally ran to the bathroom. Arthur sat there, eating his sandwich, watching chaos unfold. When Sterling came back, he wasn't wearing his jacket. His tie was loosened. And for the first time in 10 years, he walked over to Arthur's desk not to bark an order, but to ask for help. He leaned in, smelling like nervous sweat and breath mints, and whispered, "Artie, old friend, how far back do our email archives go? Specifically, deleted ones." You have to appreciate the irony, right? The man who publicly mocked Arthur's competence was now begging him to use those exact skills to save his skin. Arthur told me he looked at Sterling, really looked at him, and saw a man on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Arthur put on his best worried employee face. He lowered his voice and said, "Well, Mr. Sterling, the company server creates a shadow backup every night at midnight. Even if you delete an email from your trash folder, a copy exists on the redundancy drive for, 7 years, I believe." Sterling looked like he was going to be sick right there on the carpet. 7 years? He wheezed. Is there any way to access that drive? To, say, perform maintenance? Clean up old files to save space? Arthur pretended to think about it. He tapped his chin, furrowed his brow, and gave a hesitant nod. It's technically possible, sir, but I'd need administrator-level clearance, higher than what I have. I'd need the credentials of a director. Without hesitating, without even a second of thought, Sterling grabbed a sticky note, scribbled something down, and slapped it onto Arthur's desk. Fix it, Artie. Just wipe the last 3 years of my sent folder. Do whatever you have to do. Just make it gone before Friday. Arthur looked down at the sticky note. It was Sterling's personal username and password, not just for his email, but for the banking authorization portal, the HR records, everything. Sterling was so terrified of the phantom meeting with the CEO that he had just handed the man he bullied the keys to his entire digital life. Arthur waited until Sterling retreated into his office and closed the blinds. Then he picked up the sticky note, folded it neatly, and placed it in his pocket. He didn't delete a single thing. Instead, he logged in as Sterling and opened the draft folder of the company email. He started typing a message, but he didn't send it. Not yet. He just left it there, sitting in the drafts, like a loaded gun waiting for a trigger. Thursday rolled around, and the atmosphere in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sterling looked like a walking corpse. Dark circles under his eyes, shaking hands. The man was disintegrating. He called Arthur into his office 3 times before noon, just to whisper, "Is it done? Is it gone?" Each time, Arthur just smiled that polite, invisible smile and said, "The archives are scrubbed, Mr. Sterling. No one will find a thing." Sterling would let out this massive, shuddering breath, slumping back into his leather chair. He actually thanked Arthur. He promised him a raise. He promised him a dedicated parking spot. He truly believed Arthur had saved his life. He thought the slate was clean. But remember that draft email Arthur wrote? He hadn't deleted it. He had been refining it. Using Sterling's own login, Arthur had attached every single incriminating PDF, every flight log, every fake invoice from Apex Solutions, and the spreadsheet analyzing the shell company's ownership. It was the complete dossier of Sterling's fraud, signed digitally by Sterling himself. And the subject line? It simply read, "Full confession regarding misappropriation of funds for immediate review." Arthur didn't send it immediately, though. That would be too messy. Instead, he went into the delivery options. He set the email to delay delivery. He scheduled it to be sent automatically at exactly 4:05 p.m. on Friday, 5 minutes after the meeting with the CEO was supposed to start. So the trap was set. Sterling was walking into a fake meeting, terrified of a confrontation that wasn't going to happen, unaware that at 4:05 p.m., his own computer was going to confess his crimes to the entire board of directors, HR, and legal, all while he was sitting in the room. Arthur told me he almost felt bad for him on Thursday afternoon. Almost. But then, just before 5, Sterling walked past Arthur's desk. He had regained a bit of his arrogance since he thought the evidence was gone. He tapped Arthur's desk and said, "Make sure you stay late tomorrow, Artie. If this meeting goes south, I'm going to need you to take the fall for some clerical errors." That was the moment any shred of guilt Arthur had evaporated. He looked at Sterling's back as he walked away and thought, "Oh, I'll be here. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Friday arrived, the day of reckoning. The office felt like the inside of a pressure cooker. Sterling spent the entire morning locked in his office, pacing back and forth. You could see his silhouette through the frosted glass, just moving relentlessly like a caged tiger. He was rehearsing lies. He was preparing to throw anyone and everyone under the bus, especially Arthur. At 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting, Sterling emerged. He had tried to pull himself together. He'd shaved, put on a fresh shirt, and slicked back his hair, but his eyes were wild. He walked over to the elevator banks to head up to the executive floor. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just punched the button with a little too much force. Arthur sat at his desk, watching the clock on his computer screen. 3:50 p.m. 3:55 p.m. The office was quiet. Most people had checked out mentally for the weekend, but Arthur was dialed in. He opened a remote desktop window that allowed him to monitor the outgoing mail server traffic, just to make sure the package was ready for delivery. At 4 p.m. exactly, Arthur imagined Sterling walking into the boardroom upstairs. He imagined the CEO looking up, confused, probably holding a putter or a cup of coffee, asking, "Sterling, what are you doing here?" 4:01 p.m. Arthur took a sip of his tea. 4:03 p.m. By now, the confusion upstairs would be peaking. Sterling would be stammering, trying to explain the invite. The CEO would be denying he ever sent it. Sterling would start to realize something was wrong, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't there for an execution, but for a mistake. Relief would start to wash over him. He'd think he dodged a bullet. And then, 4:05 p.m. hit. On Arthur's screen, a small notification blinked in the corner. Message sent. The time bomb had detonated. Upstairs in that boardroom, every phone on the table, the CEOs, the legal counsels, the HR directors, lit up simultaneously. Ping, 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 the sound of a mass email arrival. Arthur sat back, interlaced his fingers behind his head, and waited for the elevator doors to open. Took exactly 4 minutes for the fallout to reach the ground floor. At 4:09 p.m., the phone at the main reception desk rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was that shrill, urgent, continuous ring that screams emergency. The receptionist picked it up, listened for about 5 seconds, and her face went completely white. She dropped the handset, didn't even hang it up, and pointed toward the elevators as 2 security guards, big guys, ex-military types, sprinted past Arthur's desk. Arthur? He just turned a page in his notebook. The entire office floor had stopped working. People were standing up in their cubicles, craning their necks. The air was electric. Everyone knew something was happening, even if they didn't know what. They heard the shouting from the elevator shaft before the doors even opened. It wasn't the CEO shouting, it was Sterling. He was screaming, "I didn't send it. I was hacked. It wasn't me." Then the elevator arrived. Ding! The doors slid open, and there he was. Sterling wasn't walking, he was being escorted. 1 guard on each arm. His tie was gone, his jacket was gone, and he looked small. He looked like a deflated balloon. The CEO had evidently read the email, opened the attachments, saw the undeniable proof sent from Sterling's own account, and made a very quick decision. They marched him right through the center of the office, the walk of shame. Every employee he had bullied, every assistant he had made cry, every junior auditor he had stolen credit from, they were all watching, silent. As they dragged him past the accounting department, Sterling dug his heels into the carpet. He stopped, panting, wild-eyed. He looked around the room desperate for an ally, desperate for someone to vouch for him. And then his eyes landed on Arthur. Arthur was the only one sitting down. He was calmly shutting down his computer for the weekend. Sterling stared at him. You could see the gears turning in his panicked brain. He remembered the glitch. He remembered the phantom meeting. He remembered giving Arthur his password on a sticky note. Sterling lunged. He actually broke free from one of the guards and lunged toward Arthur's desk, screaming, "You! It was you! You little rat! You set me up!" Sterling barely made it 2 steps before the guards tackled him. He was pinned to the carpet, face pressed against the cheap gray fabric, screaming at the top of his lungs about hackers and conspiracies. He looked deranged. To everyone watching, the secretaries, the junior staff, the managers, it just looked like a guilty man finally snapping under the weight of his own lies. And Arthur? Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood up, smoothed out his vest, and looked down at the man who had tormented him for years. With the entire office silent, Arthur said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mr. Sterling, please, you're upsetting the staff. I really hope you get the help you need." It was the final nail in the coffin. Arthur had successfully painted Sterling not just as a thief, but as unstable. The guards hauled Sterling out, still kicking and screaming, through the double doors and out of the building forever. The aftermath was swift. The board accepted Sterling's confession without question. After all, it came from his own email, attached to files only he should have had access to. He was fired for cause, and last I heard, he's facing an investigation for embezzlement. As for Arthur, he stayed for another 6 months to help clean up the mess. The company treated him like a hero. They gave him Sterling's old corner office, though Arthur preferred his quiet desk in the back. When he finally retired last week, they threw him a massive party. He walked out of there with a full pension, a gold watch, and the satisfaction of knowing he had balanced the books in more ways than one. So, the next time someone treats you like you're invisible, just remember Arthur. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just need to be the one holding the passwords. To the quiet ones, cheers.